the end of July, 12 more sharks are tagged, bringing the total in the Atlantic white shark database to 560.
The water is pitch black, freezing, and heavy with the pressure of the open ocean. Here, a 9-foot great white shark rules the shadows, an apex predator engineered over millions of years to fear absolutely nothing. But in a split second, the hunter becomes the ultimate prey. Something massive, fast, and unfathomably powerful strikes from the dark, dragging her down into an underwater abyss. What creature possesses the sheer size and malice to swallow a great white shark whole? The answer isn't a myth, and scientists finally know the actual killer. End of a great white shark. In the late autumn of 2003, off the rugged, windswept coast of southwest Australia, a team of elite marine biologists embarked on a routine research expedition that would ultimately challenge everything we thought we knew about the marine food chain. Their mission was straightforward, though inherently dangerous: locate, capture, and tag healthy apex predators to map the unseen highways of the deep. Among their subjects was a magnificent 9-foot female great white shark. The team nicknamed her Shark Alpha. To the human eye, she was an imposing marvel of evolutionary engineering. Nearly 1,000 pounds of muscle, razor-sharp teeth, and flawless predatory instincts. She was a sub-adult, young but formidable, a creature that should have enjoyed a lifetime of uncontested dominance in her coastal territory. The scientists carefully attached a state-of-the-art satellite tracking tag near her dorsal fin. This device was a data logger designed to constantly monitor her precise depth, the ambient water temperature, and her geographical coordinates. Once deployed, Shark Alpha was released back into the surf. For 4 months, she did exactly what great whites do. She patrolled the shelf, hunted fur seals, and navigated the treacherous, frigid swells of the Southern Ocean. The tag quietly pinged its data back to the researchers, painting a picture of a healthy, thriving queen of the deep. Then, on a seemingly ordinary day, the data stream abruptly went silent. 4 months after her release, a beachcomber walking along a remote stretch of the Australian coastline spotted a small plastic cylinder tangled in the dried kelp and sea foam. It was Shark Alpha's tracking tag. It hadn't fallen off naturally. It had washed ashore completely detached, far ahead of its scheduled release date. When the scientists finally retrieved the unit and plugged it into their laboratory computers, they weren't expecting anything unusual. They assumed the tag had simply malfunctioned or suffered mechanical failure. Instead, as the data points populated their screens, the room went entirely quiet. The digital readouts revealed a chronological sequence of events so bizarre, so violent, and so fundamentally unnatural that it felt like a page ripped from a horror script. The timeline began normally. On the final morning of the log, Shark Alpha was cruising at a comfortable depth of roughly 200 feet, navigating the edge of a massive, plunging underwater canyon. The water temperature was a brisk 46 Fahrenheit. Suddenly, the tag recorded a massive, chaotic burst of kinetic energy, a frantic, high-velocity struggle that lasted only a matter of seconds. And then, the descent began. In a terrifying display of raw power, whatever had seized Shark Alpha began dragging her downward at an impossible speed. The depth gauge spun out of control. 200 feet quickly became 500. 500 became 1,000. The shark was pulled down into the pitch-black, crushing depths of the oceanic trench, finally bottoming out at an astonishing 1,900 feet below the surface. At this depth, the pressure is immense enough to warp steel, and the water is hovering just above freezing. But it was the very next data point that made the scientists' blood run cold. As the shark reached the bottom of the canyon, the tag recorded an instantaneous, impossible temperature spike. In the span of a single heartbeat, the ambient temperature reading skyrocketed from 46 Fahrenheit to a staggering 78. That is a 32-degree leap in a zone where the ocean is practically an ice bath. There is no hydrothermal vent, no underwater volcano, and no natural current on Earth that can cause the deep ocean to warm up like a heated swimming pool in a microsecond. The scientists stared at the graphs, trying to find a mathematical error, a software glitch, a calibration mistake, anything to avoid the horrifying truth staring back at them. A stable internal temperature of 78 degrees Fahrenheit surrounded by freezing water can only mean one thing. The tracking tag was no longer floating in the open ocean. It was inside a living, breathing body. Shark Alpha, all 9 feet and 1,000 pounds of her, had been overpowered, crushed and swallowed into the dark, churning furnace of a massive creature's stomach. The nightmare did not end with the plunge. For 8 consecutive days, the tracking tag remained trapped inside this biological prison. The data logs from this week-long period show a macabre gastric countdown. The tag registered the slow, rhythmic pulsing of a giant digestive tract. Day after day, the predator swam through the depths, carrying the remains of Shark Alpha inside its belly, completely unfazed by the tracking device floating in its stomach acid. The creature cruised between the surface and the mid-water columns, maintaining that eerie, constant 78 Fahrenheit environment. Finally, on the 8th day, the internal temperature plunged back down to the freezing baseline of the ocean water. The tag had been excreted, cast out into the sea by the predator's digestive system, where it floated back to the surface and slowly drifted toward the shore, carrying the digital ghost of Shark Alpha with it. The data was absolute. It was unyielding. A 9-foot apex predator had been wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of seconds, hunted by an entity that didn't even notice the struggle. When the news of the data log leaked to the public, a collective shudder ran through the scientific community and the internet alike. The ocean had a new ghost, and a terrifying question echoed across the globe. What kind of nightmare is large enough to treat a great white shark as nothing more than a casual, bite-sized snack? But before science could find the real killer, the world's imagination ran completely wild, turning to ancient myths and prehistoric monsters for answers. The suspects, from megalodon to orca. When a 9-foot apex predator vanishes into the stomach of an unknown beast, the human mind naturally fills the dark with monsters. As news of Shark Alpha's sudden gastric demise rippled through internet forums, marine biology departments, and late-night talk shows, an intense global whodunit began. The tracking data was public, the variables were concrete, and yet the math simply didn't seem to add up using the standard textbook of marine life. The internet, predictably, did what it does best. It resurrected the ghosts of prehistoric history and folklore. The first and most widespread theory to capture the public imagination was the survival of Otodus megalodon. Cryptozoologists and enthusiastic theorists across the globe argued that only a relic from the Cenozoic era, a 60-foot, 60-ton super predator thought to have gone extinct millions of years ago, could effortlessly swallow a 9-foot great white whale. The narrative was seductive. We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the deepest trenches of our own oceans. Who was to say a small breeding population of prehistoric leviathans hadn't retreated into the ink-black depths of Australia's underwater canyons? However, science has a brutal way of crushing romantic myths with physics. When biologists actually looked at the data, the megalodon theory crumbled instantly. A 60-foot shark is an obligate ram ventilator, meaning it must swim constantly at high speeds to force water over its gills, and its massive body requires a staggering caloric intake. More importantly, a creature of that scale would possess an internal metabolic temperature vastly different from what was recorded. If a megalodon had swallowed the tag, the sheer thermal mass of its massive body would have registered a significantly different signature. Furthermore, a 60-foot shark wouldn't just swallow a 9-foot shark. It would leave a wake of ecological devastation and physical evidence that modern sonar and satellite systems would have picked up decades ago. The megalodon remained a ghost of the past. If it wasn't a prehistoric monster, perhaps it was a creature of myth made flesh. The second wave of speculation turned toward the invertebrates, the giant squid, Architeuthis ducks, or the even more elusive colossal squid, Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni. These real-world krakens inhabit the exact deep-water trenches where shark alpha met her end. They are known to engage in violent, deep-sea warfare with sperm whales, and they possess razor-sharp chitinous beaks capable of slicing through flesh like a hot knife through butter. The imagery of a massive, multi-tentacled nightmare rising from the 1,900-foot abyss to drag a great white down into the dark was visually spectacular. Yet, this theory collapsed under the weight of basic biology. Squids are cold-blooded ectotherms. Their internal body temperature matches the freezing environment of the deep sea exactly. If a giant squid had somehow tangled with and consumed shark alpha, the tracking tag would have recorded a temperature hovering right around 35 Fahrenheit to 40 Fahrenheit. It could never, under any biological mechanism, produce a sustained, stable internal temperature of 78 Fahrenheit. Additionally, squids do not swallow their prey whole. Their narrow esophaguses run directly through the center of their brains. To swallow food, they must shred it into tiny, bite-sized pieces using their radula. A tracking tag, subjected to a giant squid's feeding mechanism, would have been crushed to splinters long before it ever reached the stomach. With the monsters eliminated, mainstream scientists turned their attention to the only known modern mammal capable of hunting great white sharks, Orcinus orca, the killer whale. Orcas are highly intelligent, pack-hunting apex predators. In recent years, marine biologists have documented terrifying footage of orcas systematically hunting great whites off the coasts of South Africa and California, using surgical precision to flip the sharks upside down, inducing tonic immobility, a natural state of paralysis, and extracting their nutrient-rich, oily livers. The size profile fit perfectly. A bull orca can easily reach 30 feet in length and weigh over 6 tons, more than enough power to overpower a subadult great white shark. For a moment, the scientific community thought the mystery was solved. The orca hypothesis explained the violence, the depth, and the suddenness of the attack. But when the researchers cross-referenced the tracking tag's thermal logs with mammalian physiology, a glaring, undeniable anomaly emerged. Orcas are warm-blooded marine mammals. Their internal body temperature is remarkably stable, sitting comfortably between 97 Fahrenheit and 99 degrees, virtually identical to a human being. If an orca had swallowed shark alpha's tag, the digital readout would have immediately spiked to nearly 100 Fahrenheit. Instead, the tag recorded a steady, unchanging 78 Fahrenheit for 8 straight days. A 20-degree deficit in mammalian body temperature is fatal. It represents severe, impossible hypothermia. The killer whale was too hot to be the killer. The investigation had reached a maddening deadlock. The culprit had to be cold-blooded enough to sit at 78 degrees Fahrenheit in a 46 ocean, yet powerful enough to drop a 1,000-pound shark to the bottom of an abyss. The elimination of mammals, cephalopods, and prehistoric myths left the scientific team staring into a philosophical void. If it wasn't a mammal, and it wasn't a myth, what on earth has a stomach that hot? A greater white shark. When all other possibilities have been stripped away, whatever remains, no matter how unsettling, must be the truth. The elimination of prehistoric leviathans, cold-blooded giant squids, and warm-blooded marine mammals forced the research team back to the drawing board. They had to look strictly at the number, 78 degrees Fahrenheit. They needed a creature that wasn't fully cold-blooded like a standard fish, nor fully warm-blooded like a whale, but rather somewhere in the evolutionary middle. And that is when the pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place, revealing a plot twist worthy of a psychological thriller. The entity that hunted, killed, and consumed shark alpha wasn't an alien creature from the deep. It was another great white shark. One must understand the unique, sophisticated physiology of the great white to understand how this is biologically possible. Unlike the vast majority of fish, which are strictly ectothermic, meaning their body temperature matches the surrounding water exactly, sharks, belonging to the family Lamnidae, possess a miraculous biological trait known as regional endothermy. They are partially warm-blooded. Through a complex, specialized network of tightly packed interwoven veins and arteries called the wonderful net, these sharks can capture and retain the heat generated by their own massive swimming muscles. This internal counter-current heat exchange system allows a great white shark to elevate its internal body temperature significantly above the ambient temperature of the freezing water around it. This thermal advantage keeps their brains sharp, their eyes tracking faster in dark waters, and their stomachs digesting food at an accelerated rate. And what is the exact optimal internal stomach temperature of a massive, mature great white shark cruising through a cold ocean? Exactly 78 degrees. The data points no longer lied. The digital signature matched the species perfectly, but it exposed a terrifying scale difference. Shark Alpha was a respectably sized 9-foot subadult. For another great white to look at a 9-foot, 1,000-pound killing machine and decide it was nothing more than an easy meal, the attacker had to be an absolute titan. Biologists ran the behavioral data, diving patterns and metabolic rates through computer models to reverse engineer the physical profile of the attacker. The results were staggering. The killer was a colossal, cannibalistic mega shark, measuring an estimated 16 feet, 5 meters, in length and weighing well over 2 tons. To put that in perspective, this predator was nearly double the length and 4 times the total mass of the shark it assassinated. The physical mechanics of how a 16-foot shark consumes a 9-foot shark are both fascinating and gruesome. A great white of that gargantuan scale does not possess a mouth wide enough to swallow a 9-foot shark entirely whole in a single clean gulp, like a snake swallowing an egg. Instead, the attack would have been a display of catastrophic, concentrated, kinetic violence. The mega shark likely ambushed Shark Alpha from below, utilizing the classic great white hunting strategy known as a breaching strike. Blasting out of the deep canyon shadows at speeds approaching 25 miles per hour, the 2-ton monster would have rammed Shark Alpha with the force of a vehicular collision, instantly stunning her and breaking her spine. With the prey immobilized, the apex predator would have used its serrated, triangular teeth and a violent, side-to-side head-shaking motion to sever Shark Alpha into massive, manageable chunks. The mega shark's jaws can exert over 4,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, allowing it to cut through the dense muscle, thick skin, and calcified skeletal cartilage of the smaller shark like a chainsaw. The attacker then swallowed these massive, heavy sections of meat sequentially. The tracking tag, still firmly attached to the dorsal cartilage of Shark Alpha, was swallowed along with one of these enormous chunks of flesh. It slid down the dark esophagus and plunged into the highly acidic muscular furnace of the giant's stomach, where it began recording that stable 78 degrees thermal reading, surrounded by churning gastric juices. The mystery was officially solved, but the resolution unearths a darker, more profound biological reality. The revelation shifted the scientific inquiry from a question of identity to a question of behavior. We had found the monster, but now we had to understand the madness behind its actions. Because in the deep ocean, the rules of survival are rewritten in blood, and family ties offer no protection against hunger. The science of apex cannibalism. Finding the killer didn't close the case file. It opened an entirely new chapter in marine behavioral science. To the human mind, cannibalism is the ultimate taboo, an act of desperate madness or monstrous deviation. But the ocean doesn't operate on human morality. In the cold, calculating theater of the deep sea, eating your own kind isn't a glitch in the system. It is a highly successful evolutionary strategy. When scientists looked closer at the world of sharks, they realized that cannibalism isn't just an occasional accident. It is practically written into their DNA from the very beginning of their lives. To truly understand why a 16-foot megashark would hunt down a 9-foot member of its own species, you have to travel back in time before they are even born. In many shark species, the war for survival begins inside the womb. This biological phenomenon is known as intrauterine cannibalism, or oophagy. Inside the mother shark's uterus, multiple embryos develop simultaneously. However, the first embryo to hatch or grow large enough doesn't sit quietly waiting for birth. Instead, it turns around and systematically hunts down and devours its own unborn brothers and sisters, along with any unfertilized eggs the mother produces. By the time a sand tiger shark or a great white is born, it is already a seasoned killer that has sustained itself by consuming its own kin. They enter the ocean pre-programmed with a chilling reality. Everything is food, and nothing is safe. Not even family. As sharks grow from vulnerable pups into apex predators, this intra-species violence shifts from a necessity of birth to a tool of environmental management. There are two primary drivers behind why a massive great white would eliminate a smaller one: territorial dominance and opportunistic energetics. Great white sharks are highly migratory, but they are also deeply territorial when it comes to prime hunting real estate. The waters off southwest Australia, where shark alpha met her end, are an ecological goldmine filled with high-calorie prey like fur seals and sea lions. A 16-foot, 2-ton mature great white requires an astronomical amount of fat to maintain its massive body and fuel its transoceanic voyages. A 9-foot subadult shark represents a double threat to an established titan. First, it is an active competitor, a younger, faster hunter, draining the local seal population. Second, and more importantly, that 9-foot shark is essentially a floating 1,000-pound protein bar. From a purely energetic standpoint, a smaller shark is a perfect meal. It doesn't have the thick, impenetrable blubber of a whale, but its body is packed with dense muscle and a massive, oily liver. A shark's liver can account for up to a quarter of its entire body weight, and it is loaded with squalene, a high-energy compound that provides incredible caloric density. Why would a massive shark spend hours chasing agile, fast-turning fur seals when it can use its sheer size advantage to ambush a smaller shark and secure enough calories to sustain itself for weeks? Furthermore, this act of apex cannibalism serves as a brutal form of population control. In the animal kingdom, mature apex predators will routinely eliminate the next generation of hunters to protect their own status at the top of the food chain. Lions will kill rival cubs. Wolves will eliminate neighboring packs. In the ocean, a 16-foot great white asserts its dominance by making an example of anything that enters its shadow. This behavior completely reframes our understanding of the ocean's social structure. For decades, popular culture painted great whites as solitary, mindless killing machines that roamed the empty blue in total isolation. In reality, they exist within a complex, terrifyingly strict hierarchy, based entirely on size and intimidation. When a giant shark arrives at a feeding ground, the smaller sharks don't just stay out of its way, they actively flee the area. Shark Alpha's fatal mistake wasn't a lack of survival instincts. She simply miscalculated her position on the ladder. She swam into a canyon ruled by an ocean tyrant, and she paid the ultimate price for her trespassing. But this dark phenomenon isn't isolated to a single shark fight off the coast of Australia. It is a fundamental law of the deep ocean. What lurks in the deep canyons? To truly grasp how an event of this magnitude occurs, one must look away from the animals themselves and focus on the eerie, unmapped arenas where these collisions take place. The tracking data showed that Shark Alpha's final moments unfolded over a plunging underwater canyon, nearly 2,000 feet down. These abyssal trenches carve through the continental shelves of the Australian coast, forming an environment completely divorced from the sunlit, postcard-perfect surface world. This is the bathypelagic zone, a realm of perpetual night, bone-chilling cold, and immense, crushing pressure. To picture this transition, consider the drastic shift in the ocean's vertical columns. At the surface, down to a few hundred feet, lies the sunlit zone where Shark Alpha spent her normal days cruising through 46 Fahrenheit water and hunting fur seals. But when the sudden, chaotic struggle occurred, The tracking tag registered a high-velocity plunge past the twilight zone, dropping straight down into the freezing midnight zone. It was at that crushing depth of 1,900 feet that the tag recorded its impossible 32-degree temperature spike, marking the exact moment the device was swallowed into the belly of the beast. In these deep-sea canyons, ecology shifts into something strange, alien, and intensely predatory. Because of a physical process called upwelling, deep, nutrient-dense currents hit the steep canyon walls and bounce violently upward toward the surface. This massive displacement of water brings up minerals and organic material, triggering an explosion of life. Plankton blooms attract schools of fish, which in turn attract giant squids, deep-sea crabs, and large pelagic fish. This localized abundance of life transforms these underwater trenches into an ecological gold mine. It draws smaller predators from miles around, which naturally draws in the true monsters of the ocean. But the deep ocean environment does something else to biology. It triggers a bizarre evolutionary phenomenon known as deep-sea gigantism. For reasons marine biologists still actively debate, whether it is driven by the freezing water slowing down metabolic rates, the necessity to store massive fat reserves due to scarce food supplies, or adaptation to immense hydrostatic pressure, creatures that inhabit the deep ocean tend to grow to monstrous proportions compared to their shallow water relatives. In these shadows, isopods grow to the size of small dogs, and squids stretch to the length of school buses. When a large predator enters this zone, the rules of scale change entirely. While great whites are traditionally depicted in popular media as surface hunters that exclusively patrol sunlit coastlines and shallow seal colonies, the tracking data from Shark Alpha provided undeniable proof of a different reality. These massive apex predators are highly active explorers of the dark abyss. They utilize these deep underwater canyons as subterranean superhighways, descending thousands of feet into the pitch-black cold to exploit deep-sea food sources and migrate undetected across vast distances. However, this hunting strategy carries a severe operational hazard. When multiple giant predators are funneled into the narrow ink-black corridors of an underwater canyon, violent territorial encounters and predatory ambushes become an ecological inevitability. In the dark, visibility drops to zero, radar and lateral lines take over, and any creature smaller than its neighbor instantly transforms into a potential target. The great white is far from the only shark species to engage in this dark, canyon-dwelling cannibalism. In fact, large-scale intraspecies predation is a global underworld law among apex sharks. Consider the tiger shark, often called the garbage can of the ocean due to its non-discriminatory diet. Tiger sharks are notorious, documented cannibals. Mature adults will routinely patrol shallow coastal nurseries and deep drop-offs, specifically to hunt down and consume younger tiger shark pups of their own kind. In the chilling, ice-choked waters of the North Atlantic, the mysterious Greenland shark, a creature that can live for over 400 years and grows to lengths that easily match the largest great whites, frequently scavenges and predates upon other Greenland sharks in the freezing depths of Arctic fjords. Even the bull shark, famous for its unique ability to thrive in both saltwater and freshwater environments, relies heavily on a diet of smaller sharks to sustain its highly aggressive metabolic needs. Across all these diverse species and environments, a universal law remains entirely constant. Size is the only currency that carries any real value. In the dark corridors of the world's underwater trenches, there are no species alliances, no maternal bonds, and no evolutionary mercy. There is only the consumer and the consumed. The deeper we look into these oceanic canyons, the more we realize that the marine food chain is not a linear ladder with a neat, orderly progression from small fish to big fish. Instead, it is a chaotic, self-consuming wheel where the top tier is constantly folding in on itself. Shark Alpha's violent plunge into the Australian abyss was a rare, digitized window into an ecosystem that operates entirely in the dark, driven by primeval urges. oceans, massive size disparities, and the unyielding necessity of caloric survival. It proved that the deep ocean is a theater of endless warfare, where even a 1,000-pound killing machine can find itself on the wrong side of the hunting equation. This realization forces us to confront a humbling truth about our understanding of the natural world and our place within it. The illusion of the ultimate predator. For generations, humanity has looked at the great white shark as the absolute ceiling of oceanic violence, a creature that answers to no one. We draw neat, orderly food chains in textbooks, placing a single, definitive crown at the very top. But the tracking data from that cold Australian canyon forces us to throw those textbooks away. In the real world, the food chain is not a ladder. It is a circle that constantly feeds upon itself. This event serves as a humbling reminder of just how little we know about the unmapped wilderness of our own planet. We have mapped the surfaces of distant planets and sent probes past the edges of our solar system. Yet right here on Earth, just a few miles off a popular Australian beach, giant monsters are rewriting the rules of biology in the dark. A 9-foot shark is a terrifying engine of destruction to a human, but to the true titans of the abyss, it is merely a high-calorie snack. The story of the consumed great white teaches us that in the ocean, dominance is entirely an illusion of scale. There is no permanent crown, no safe territory, and no absolute immunity. The moment an apex predator buys into its own myth of invincibility is the moment it steps into the shadows of something larger. Because in the deep, blue heart of our world, the ancient law of the sea remains undefeated. No matter how big, fast, or ruthless you think you are, there is always a bigger fish lurking in the dark. Hit that subscribe button if you liked this video.